Welcome to Dissertation Discourse, where learning obscure expectations can be fun. We will discuss strategies and techniques in the world of academia. Join us as we learn about ways to get your dissertation approved. Our guests include expert faculty reviewers, mentors, writing experts, and even students who have survived the process. I believe that learning should be easy to understand and fun. That's why I've created a podcast that's both informative and entertaining. This is Dr. Catherine Van Osselt, and I am thrilled to introduce Dr. Nicole Holby. Thank you so much for coming and talking to me about your perspective on dissertations. One, I just enjoy working with you so much. I think you're a phenomenal colleague, and that's why I wanted to speak with you. And then I was thinking we have our own connection. Not only do we work together on dissertation committees, but we have our own connection with dissertations because I actually chaired your dissertation. I had actually forgotten that and then thought of it when I was coming into the meeting. I was like, that's pretty incredible that we have that history together. So please tell us a little bit about your educational background and how many dissertations do you think you have chaired or been a reviewer for or committee member?
Well, first, thank you for having me on here just to chat about this. I think this is, I guess in academia, this is fun. So, I like doing this sort of thing. And it really is such a neat thing to take a look back and see the work that we did with you mentoring my dissertation and everything, learning from that journey and us learning together even through this now and working together on dissertations. And so just one of those really neat full circle experiences. And so, for me, I think, and I was thinking about this yesterday when I was, trying to really better understand myself as a researcher, a qualitative researcher. And I think that for me, that didn't start in my doctoral program. I think for me, that started in my love of literature. And so I think as a qualitative researcher, especially looking at thematic analysis, one of the things that you're looking beyond, right? You're looking beyond what the words have said to you and linking together everything else, including the nonverbal reactions in those interviews and so forth. And so I think my own training and my background in English literature, I was originally going to go be a high school English teacher and just decided that really wasn't for me. Once I started getting into student teaching, I stuck with it, still, had my bachelor's degree in English literature, but the work that I did in that space and learning how to really understand what's being said beyond the words on a page, I think helped to really prepare me to be a qualitative researcher, and is why I lean towards it so naturally. And so that, I think, really was a very foundational building block for me to naturally gravitate to this and, didn't get into actual research and looking at thematic analysis until my own doctoral journey. And since then, I will say that I've probably and currently sit on about 25 to 30 dissertations that it's helped me to feel in a much more comfortable and confident space.
Well, I think that really speaks to why I wanted to have the conversation, was because you go through it on your own when you're earning your own PhD. And then you serve as a mentor and you're sort of figuring everything out again. And then what I'm finding through my time reviewing dissertations is you keep getting better and better. And then when you serve in a role like I did briefly, but I did serve as school reviewer, then you get this other elevated experience of just the sheer number that you're seeing. So then you get to see sort of the nuances between different faculty members, what's the university looking for. And I feel like we have such rich experiences beyond what a typical, quite honestly, faculty member has, let alone a dissertation mentee. And so I really appreciate you kind of speaking to that growth, because I think that speaks to the advantage of all of those experiences. You start becoming stronger and clearer about what it is that you're looking for, and to be able to share that with others. I think this is a hugely unique opportunity. All right. Let's get in there. Does that sound good?
I'm ready.
All right. So here's my opening question for you. When you first pick up a dissertation to do a review, how do you know when you read that first chapter, this is going to be good?
I'm looking for, and as simple as it sounds, but I'm looking for the thread that is woven through, that makes sense, that's tying this together, that I can see that one piece connects to the next piece. I would say that when I'm looking at a dissertation, the first thing that I do, and this was much the same as what I would do when I was in a course room and, reading a master's level paper and getting ready to grade and review that, I always look at the quality of the writing first, because if there are a lot of issues, and I kind of take this and conversate a lot of conversations with Dr. Bill Attridge too, that when you're reading it and there are a lot of writing errors, it's noisy. And so it's difficult to be able to navigate down those roadways to understand, is the purpose clear? Is the significance evident? Is the research and what they've provided here, does this really support the scientific merit behind this study? And so I think looking at first going through and making sure that the writing, it has a quality level that I'm going to be able to look at it and see if the thread is effectively woven through. And so as long as the writing looks good, then I feel comfortable that I can start. And I know that even if there might be some things that you need to provide some feedback on, maybe some grammar errors or so forth, that it's not going to distract from my ability to be able to see the science behind what they're presenting.
I like that a lot, because I feel like, especially when you're chairing a dissertation, so much of the effort then starts leading up to chapters 4 and 5. How are you tying everything back together? That I think chapter 1 sometimes gets forgotten along the way. And then you think it's all good and ready. And so I would recommend really going back and really focusing back on chapter 1, because probably things shifted throughout the process, and how you perceive what happened probably shifted since you last wrote chapter 1. So I think that really speaks to ensuring that chapter 1, I think of it as it needs to be straight. It needs to be clear. And I like how you talked about that thread, tying it all together.
And and with that, I think a strong chapter 1, as simple as it may seem, because it's the smallest, generally it's the shortest chapter, because it's our 30,000 foot view snapshot. But a strong chapter 1 is going to, when our mentees get to chapter 5, sometimes they're working on fumes, and it's hard to tap into that creativity, and it's hard to tap into that resilience and get and really get into their grit of it. And I think if you have a strong chapter 1, that chapter 5, when you're looking at, you review back at chapter 1, chapter 5 is really addressing a lot of what you've already identified in chapter 1. So it's giving you this sort of roadmap of, what do I need to focus on here? What was it that I said was important? And I should make sure that I'm also touching upon this in chapter 5 when I'm tying all of these things together. So the hard work put into chapter 1 benefits you in chapter 5.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like you spoke to this a little bit, specifically around also having scholarly tone and keeping that throughout. I feel like that is a feedback component that I hear. I'm curious what your thoughts are around how to help, people in the process strengthen their scholarly tone.
Mm-hmm. In terms of, I would say, active and passive tone, right? How are we presenting our sentences? And there is a parallel process, even with counseling. So if we are using a reflection, it's going to be stronger if we come directly at that reflection and are more direct towards the client, as opposed to taking a few extra words and sidestepping around it and then coming at it. Because what that says to the client is, well, if you don't feel comfortable directly coming at it, then I shouldn't feel comfortable receiving it, or shouldn't feel comfortable, with that either. And so I think writing is a parallel to that for us, especially in the counseling field. You can look at it in that way. How can I be more direct and explicit and say what I need to say with only the number of words that need to be used to say it?
I love that parallel. It makes you a more effective counselor. It makes you more of an effective writer. I remember, actually, my dissertation got published in the Journal of Counseling and Development, and it was approved with changes upon submission. And it was, I don't remember now, I'll say 45 pages. That sounds about right for JCD.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember they made me cut out, it was something like 58 words. And the labor that I had to take to omit those 58 words, because I felt like every word was so critical and necessary. And the challenge at really condensing and being clear when I was articulating my research. And that I think that you just spoke to the core of parsimony at its best, right? Make sure that every word really matters. And that will also then help communicate what you're trying to share. I love that.
It really does. And I think, when you look at writing from a developmental perspective as well, your mentees that come through the process that have a stronger command over their writing skills and feel more comfortable in that space, you will see more of that active tone, more of that strong scholarly tone that we want to see versus the passive tone, because there are some challenges with how do I say this in the most commanding way. And then I think there's also not even just relating to active and passive tone, but I think we have a lot of mentees that have done some creative writing in the past. And so they add that creative writing flair in there. And we love it when we're reading something that is meant to be creative writing. But when we're in a research tone, we need to make sure that we maintain that tone. And so having, conversational speak and conversational tone in a dissertation is also not appropriate. And conversely, we also have to be modest. And so how do we balance having an active tone while also being modest about our perspective, our understanding, and our own research?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm thinking two things, like when someone will say, we must do this, or it's always this way. It's like take out those absolutes, just like challenging in counseling, right? To go back to that metaphor. That's perfect. And then also stripping away that emotional language. And sometimes I've read dissertations that at times they have sentences that look more like a newspaper headline trying to grab your attention. And I say, okay, just keep it, stick to the facts. So great. Good points. Good points. All right. A strength and a major reason why I wanted to talk to you was I would really like to hear, one of my favorite conversations we had was about creating themes and, thematic analysis, Braun and Clark. Let's kind of dig in there. Just go for it. I love talking themes and I like how you conceptualize it. So tell me a little bit about how you conceptualize themes when someone's trying to pull together their results.
Absolutely. And I think I can even just, even frame this around what I do when I get the mentees in front of me after I've taken a look at the themes. One of the first things that someone should do as they're going through, particularly looking at inductive analysis, right, and looking at Braun and Clark's model, the important thing to do when we get into the data is the only question that matters is the research question. And that has to be the focal point. Where there's such a slippery slope is, well, I've created these beautiful 12 guided questions that I asked my participants, and that because you've done it 10 times or 12 times or however many times you did an interview, those are the questions that are really burned into your mind. And so you're thinking about them, and then if that's where your mind is as you're looking at the themes, then your themes are going to be very topic summary. So you're looking at them just from that perspective. So I would say that if we're looking at this in terms of what do I do after I've already gathered all of this data, how do I develop these themes? Get rid of the guided questions. So the first thing to do would be to forget that they exist for now. We only want to look at the data in a pile. And so when we're thinking about the data, it's everything's in there all together. And we're going to put our qualitative gloves on and go in and start sorting them out and start moving some things around to better understand where some of these things fit. And a big part of that driving force is the reflexive journal that we've done when we're in our interviews. And I don't think that the importance of a reflexive journal can really be understated, because it helps us to better understand our own interpretations. When we are in an interview with a participant, we're having an emotional reaction. we're feeling things, we're sensing it, we're using that intuition that is there in qualitative research. And so it's important that we're also notating what's happened, even, making different comments during the interview, but certainly afterwards, that reflection, what happened, how did I feel, what was said, what were some of the reactions that I observed the participants giving on certain questions or statements. And those go into how we are conceptualizing the information. And I think it's important to also recognize that the way that we are going to design and the way that we're going to do the thematic analysis also has to do with what is our research design. And so if we're looking at phenomenology versus generic qualitative study, you're looking at them differently. And so one, in generic qualitative, we're really putting a lot of our interpretations in there versus in phenomenology, we're allowing the data to speak for itself. And so it's also better understanding what's my design, what am I here to do? I recently, just this week, was in a defense call with a very skilled researcher doing their second doctorate. And so have a very strong command over what they're doing. And I really appreciated the way they discussed it, because you can see them threading through also the fact that, this is very pragmatic. So we're looking at a pragmatic design. And so we have to understand, what are those underpinnings? How are we pulling this together to develop a thematic analysis that is aligned with the full design, not just the analysis piece.
That's really fantastic that you connected those.
Yeah. And so starting there. And that really helps you to understand what it is you're doing for thematic analysis. And so, we have all of our data, we're starting to pull out codes, and the codes, we can certainly have codes within each of the guided questions, right? As we're looking through, it could be a single word, it could be a phrase, and we're looking across the information. So when we're looking for responses, we're not just looking at all 10 participants and all of their responses for guided question 1. We're looking at those 10 participants and their responses across all 12 guided questions, and where is the connected theme there? If we only look for an answer that's within the guided question, we're only going to get the topics of that guided question. And so the topics are great codes. They help us to understand what are some important pieces. And sometimes there's also a quantitative nature there, because we can see that, something was mentioned so many times, or because it was mentioned so many times, it pops out to us as a pattern, right? And so we're looking for those patterns. And often they'll come from within an individual question and across questions that are related. And so what I often see in dissertations that come through is we've got great codes, and we're at a great coding phase. And so, we know all of the things that were said about X, but we don't yet know the answer to the research question. And so it's always going back to that research question. And it even goes back to chapter 1. When we're getting ready to do this full thematic analysis and we're looking at, what's my research question? This is the thing that I'm answering here. This has been the whole purpose and the significance. That's what we want to reflect back on. So it's good for us as a researcher to take a look and say, what was the purpose that brought me here? What did I say was my purpose in chapter 1? What did I say was going to be the significance? What are the things that I'm looking at? Where were the gaps? What are some of these things that I'm investigating as I'm looking through this data? And when we go from that lens and we really are tying everything together, then it makes sense. It's the results are going to make sense to the research question, are also going to make sense to the work that was done in the previous 3 chapters.
So many fantastic tidbits. So much relevancy. I really like that, from my interpretation, is that uncoupling yourself from using that reflexive journal as to eliminate or address biases, and instead really thinking about that, how does that connect back to your original research question, and really amplify that personal experience, so that then when you see the words or the codes coming up, you're really tapping back into yourself as the instrument, your role is deeply understanding this concept to help elevate that thematic insight and bringing things back up rather than going down into the individual contextual words.
Yes, exactly. We're in it. We're in it. We are a part of this. We're not just, we're not in some outside experience, and we're looking down at it and trying and letting these things just uncover themselves. We've got to get in it, and we're a part of that. And what better way to really go back and understand and tap into the experience during the interviews.
Yeah. Depending on your model, depending on your
right?
model
And
your theoretical framework. I like that.
Absolutely.
What about this one? Because I feel like it's a little bit tricky. Sometimes when people are naming their themes, again, it feels just more like a topic code, or like how I feel like I like that when they're like juicy and maybe a little bit more creative in identifying what one or two themes might be. Tell me some of your thoughts about actually identifying and naming the themes.
Again, I really think it goes back to what's being said beyond the words. So often themes, we'll see a theme that's named and it comes from the theory, or the theme that it comes from, it's a specific term that was identified in the research, in the literature review, or was just the word that was said the most. But that's not capturing the theme. So I think when we're thinking about the theme, we want to look at this information, the participant quotes. What is this saying to me beyond that, right? And so maybe it's describing what the definition of this is. So let me develop the summary of what I think this means with these participant quotes together. And now that I know what that means, what's the best way to encapsulate that? And it's not by the most common word, it's the essence. It's what is beyond the words. It's what are you seeing here? What's the feeling? What's the experience? And maybe it does. Maybe it is related, and there's a similarity to the research. Sometimes it does come from there. We're certainly not going to say that nothing does, but it's really taking a look beyond just the words that are provided in the participant statements and getting a better sense of what is it, what does it mean? And it can be one word, it could be 2 to 3 words. Braun and Clark would say the shorter the title for that theme is most appropriate. And we want to capture something that does draw attention and that we are seeing. We also don't want to do something that is very confusing and overly creative, to where then it's like, I'm not really understanding what this means. It seems like we've gotten a little too creative, and it almost sounds like the theme, sounds more like a Shakespearean sonnet than it does. The title sounds like a sonnet more than it does something in scientific research. And so I think there's also that fine balance.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I feel like this sort of threads me through as well to, when you're writing that chapter 5, it's like, why does this matter? Who cares? Why does this matter? And so maybe having that sort of in the back end, it's like, what was that research question? And then that forward facing lens of, as you name the theme, because how is this going to resonate for people in the field that this matters to?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you want it to make an impact. It's something that you're leaving your readers with. And so if that theme, you want that to be something that catches on, that they're thinking about, and that they walk away, and the theme is really that catch point for them. And so having it be something that's impactful and is also clear, very clear to the meaning that you're presenting of this theme, that the participants' responses really evidence. That's another important piece. We shouldn't read the theme and it's very creative, and then the meaning, they don't seem to connect. They should connect very well.
Mm-hmm. That's that keeping that thread all the way through, again, keeping it tight, making those connections direct and clear. Great. I do have a question that I would love your perspective on, because I find this one challenging. And I know different institutions may have different expectations, but how would you recommend connecting the implications, so the outcomes from the research, back to the theory? First of all, I think it's hard.
it's very hard. This actually brings up a good point. And I think it's important to call out that it is very challenging for a novice researcher, and it can be challenging just for a researcher in general. The way that our dissertation process is established, it makes it very difficult for the novice researcher to just not try to prove the theory or not try to prove or disprove the previous research.
Right.
Because it's so there. And I think in the implications, that's another slippery slope. We are not proving or disproving a theory. We're not proving or disproving previous research, but we're trying to better understand, does this research, did the theory previously ever talk about my population? If it never talked about your population, then you've just given some additional, and assuming your research supports the theory, you've just given some credence to that theory because you now have another population that has evidenced what the tenets and the constructs of the theory describe.
Yeah.
And so, I think that's a really important piece when we're looking at theory and looking at those implications. We also, I think it's also important to go back to that piece of modesty.
Yeah.
Because recognizing that even though there's a lot of passion and a lot of energy and love and ourselves that we pour into the dissertation, it is a dissertation research. And so the impact of that research, as much as we may want it to have a significant impact on the theory or an impact on the field and on future research, it may not have that much of an impact. We may find that there really wasn't any difference between what our population said and what the theory said. And so I think that's an important piece to come back to, is when we're talking about the implications, when we're talking about, practicality of future research, it's really coming at that from a modest lens and saying, does my statement hold weight? If I'm saying that this is going to have an implication, what is truly telling me that this direction is here? Or is that pretty loosely tied? And so I think it's very important that we check our researcher ego.
I like that. I like that. Oh, Dr. Holby, thank you so much for all of your thoughts and commentary and sharing your experiences. What's a final insight or something you might want to share with someone going through this process?
I would say that for specific to qualitative research and specific to thematic analysis, it is that, one, if you've just completed your research and you've done your initial review and you think you've come to your themes and it seemed to come very easily, the likelihood that those are actually the themes is probably pretty low. And so qualitative research is hard. Thematic analysis is hard. Braun and Clark say it in about 200 and some pages. And, all other qualitative researchers do as well. It's not an easy thing. And so if you arrive at your results and you feel as though it was pretty easy, the likelihood is that you come up with some codes, and maybe not even the codes that are strong enough for the research. And so I think it's getting a sense and getting an understanding of what those are. What is a latent code? What is a semantic code? What are we looking for here? Are we looking for the deeper meaning? A semantic code is going to be something that's very surface, very on top, doesn't really evidence drilling down in and getting an understanding of the true experience, the underlying experience that's threading across the participants.
Yeah.
And so I think it's very important to have an understanding of that, and to also recognize that the thematic process is a reworking process. So once you have some things come up and you think that you've had your themes, dive right back in and start looking at it again. Look at it from a different lens and say, does this actually make sense? Because it takes work, it takes time. And if you put that time in and you come at that with that iterative process in mind, that I'm going to keep reworking these themes until I feel like I've worked them so much they can't be worked any further, that's when you've likely come at the understanding and the shared experience across those themes. So that's what I would say is, don't, if it feels like it was very easy, get back in there and keep working it, because if you probably haven't gone far enough just yet.
I think that's such incredible feedback, because you think you have the theme and you don't. And I feel like, to go back to the counseling metaphor, it's like, oh, you think you've resolved the issue in the first session? You probably didn't get to the core. Or at session 4, right when you think, all right, I'm good, the client's going about their, no, you probably need to go deeper. And so I think that connects that piece about, you just got to keep digging and refining and reworking until you really get at the deepest connections. Excellent.
Yeah, we're explorers, qualitative researchers. Yeah. I mean, not to say that quantitative researchers aren't either, but we get our hands dirty and we get in there with those themes, and we're a part of all of that. And so you really have to dive in and get very, very familiar with it, very close to it.
Excellent. All right. Thank you so much. What an honor to have your perspectives and thoughts and insights. I always like to close, because I like to keep learning and being gifted new insights as well. So right now, do you have a podcast or song or show that's bringing you joy?
Oh, bringing me joy.
Or laughter. Or tears.
Yes. So I would say that I really enjoy NPR podcasts. And so one of the ones that I've been listening to recently and still trying to finish, I'm about halfway through it, but it's a podcast called White Lies. And it really just goes through different things that have happened in history. And I love history. And so, it's very investigative, and it's just interesting to hear how they uncover different things that have happened that we don't really know about. So that one has been a fun one to listen to.
That sounds great. I'll have to check that out. All right. Thank you so much. I respect you a great deal. Thank you so much for being here.
This was
until
wonderful.
Next time. Yeah.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dr.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Leave a comment if this was a helpful review, and give me your tips. I know that you're busy, and wanting to earn your PhD is a lofty and rigorous goal. A few minutes with this podcast will save you time. Stay tuned to Dissertation Discourse, where learning obscure expectations can be fun.